I'd like to welcome everybody back to our Wednesday night Bible study. It's 6 o'clock. We'll give some people some time to still get on here. Um, we've had a blessed day, and hope you have. Lord's blessed us with a lot of beautiful days here recently. I think it's been. I think it's a blessing because my kids are able to get outside and play instead of being stuck in the house with the issue of the coronavirus, and it's just makes it more enjoyable. It's not been too hot either. It's been about the right temperature, and I thank the Lord for that. But I do want to remind everybody, if you want to do a prayer request in the comments, you can. Um, I I may be able to see it. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. Still learning about this YouTube stuff, but I do. I will go back and check it, and do check it from time to time to see if anybody's commented on it for a prayer request. But we desire your prayers. I'm not. I'm always in need of prayer. If you can't find anybody to pray for, you can always pray for me. I always need the help. Um, but I guess we could take this time too and invite people to our drive-in church service. That happens on every Sunday at 11 o'clock. You're more than welcome. Uh, don't want to pull you away from your church. If your church is doing something like that, then you need to be there. But if your church is not able, or if you don't go to church and would like to come, you're more than welcome to come. We'd love to have you. Um, Still gonna give just a couple more minutes. If you want to get your Bibles, we'll be in 2 Samuel chapter 18. We're going to probably just get through the first 9 verses of chapter 18. I don't know, I couldn't get no farther than that. I've read farther, but as I was studying, I just felt like there was a lot in there, and I didn't want to. We may go farther. We'll see. Um, last Wednesday, um, we looked at how three, Shobai and Makir and Barzillai, they brought things to David in his time of need. The first time, Ziba met him a little past the top of the hill and brought him just food, but this time the Lord brought him beds and all kinds of different things. That's the very end of chapter 17. And we seen that God was preparing them for what was to come because they had a battle coming. And we'll see that coming up in chapter 18. Um, you know, so often we forget how great our God is and how big He is and how He's got the whole scheme of the world in His hands. And there's nothing happens that He doesn't know about, and there's nothing happens that He doesn't let happen. Uh, there's things that we do that He has to let happen because it's our choice, but it's not necessarily what He wants to happen. But that's just the way it goes. But if you got your Bibles, we'll go ahead and start reading in verse 1 of chapter 18. And David numbered the people that were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. And David sent forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab, and a third part under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and the third part under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. And before we read any farther, something we need to look at is he had to set captains over thousands and over hundreds. A lot of times when we read in the Old Testament, we forget, we think that it was just David and his immediate family. We think that he was just, he was traveling with, a couple hundred people. But most of the time, they were traveling with a lot more. When the children of Israel come out of Egypt, they say it was in the millions that crossed the Red Sea. Um, but here we see he numbered them over the thousands and over hundreds. This was more than just a couple hundred people. There were thousands of David's people with him. And so this was a great task and a great thing that, and something we don't look at and realize and see. Not only is David fleeing for his life, and I think in this one he's not fleeing that he would die. He's fleeing so he don't have to kill his own son. He's trying to avoid conflict and trying to avoid a confrontation. But he's looking out for what he has to do. But he's looking out for these people. He's looking out for what they have to do. And but we see here something that I just kind of got into and didn't really. A lot of people are going to know a lot more, but I was looking at Joab and Abishai. Joab and Abishai were brothers. They were the son of Zeruiah. There was a third brother, if you remember, was Asahel, but he was killed by the hand of Abner. And it was back, I want to think in First Psalms, or not First Psalms, but First Samuel. Towards the end, Asahel, it said he was swifter runner than the rest of them, than his other two brothers, and he ran after Abner, and Abner told him to turn back, and he wouldn't, so Abner struck him under the fifth rib. And then you remember that it was Joab who killed Abner, and he struck Abner under the fifth rib, just like Abner had done to Asahel. But something I want us to look at were these three men here, these three captains that he had put. Joab and Abishai had went through a lot with David. They had been David's captains in multiple battles in multiple armies. We read when they fought against the children of Ammon, and the children of Ammon went out against the Syrians, or they went out and got the Syrians, and Joab and Abishai set battle against both of them. And you remember Joab told Abishai, he said, if they start defeating me, I'll yell for you, you come help me. And he said, if they start defeating you, you yell for me, and I'll come help you. And they ended up defeating both the Syrians and the Ammon and the children of Ammon at the same time. But these two men were mighty warriors and great warriors. And something that I as I was reading that, why did he set them over that? Why did he set them over this task of being a captain over this? They had proved themselves to David. They had shown for many years and for many battles that they could handle it. And a lot of times as Christians, we don't look at that. One thing that we do, that a lot of us do, is we think, oh, I've got saved. Okay, I'm gonna just dive in and I'm gonna be a deacon, or I'm gonna be a pastor, or I'm gonna be a preacher. And the first and foremost thing is we can't do those if God doesn't call us to do them. If God, that's one thing about I know with me. God called me to be a pastor, and he called me to be a preacher. And you say, Jeremy, how do you know that? Because I have to preach. I don't care where I'm at and what I'm doing. I have to preach. My kids, I'm a school teacher, and my kids at school, they get, they'll say I preach to them about once a week, not meaning to, not knowing, and it may not be. It may not be a long message, but it's, it always comes out. Because that's what God's called me to do, and that's what he implanted in me. But these two men, they had proved themselves. A lot of young Christians think that they can fight the battles that the elders in the church fight. A lot of young Christians think that they can slay the giants just as easy as everybody else is slaying the giants. But that's not so. There's times that things like that do happen, but majority of the time we've got to grow. And we've got to get stronger and get stronger and get stronger. Before you can lead, you have to learn to follow. When he looked at the life of David, before David could lead the children of Israel, he had to lead a flock of sheep on the hillside first. He had to prove himself with that sheep, and God, seeing that he was faithful with that sheep, how much more faithful would he be with the children of Israel? And so David, these two men here, that they've proven themselves. They've fought. They were great soldiers. They've been in the battle. They've had David's back. They've always been with him. They've always stood up for him. And then we look at the third one. The third one is Ittai. And if you remember Ittai, we go back just a couple chapters. I think around chapter 15. Ittai was the one that come out when Absalom had stole the heart of the children of Israel, and David began to flee. Ittai came with him. And David told him, said, you need to return back. He said, you don't need this burden on you. He said, and plus, David had just met Ittai the day before he fled out of Israel. And so David told him, go on back. But Ittai said no. Told David he was his Lord and he was his king, and he would follow him, whether it be in death or in life. And Ittai proved to David there his loyalty. And Ittai proved to David how much he cared for David. And he proved that he would listen and do whatever David asked. And by doing that, now he's able to be a captain over his army. A lot of times we don't understand that with God, is that sometimes when we're going through something, when we're going through a trial, or when we're having to face something, or in church, I look at my life. Me and my best friend Jonathan, we started off teaching Bible school. And we taught like first grade one year. And then the next year we taught second grade. Then we taught third grade. And then from that, I was, the Lord moved me in to where I was helping with the youth, and I would help teach classes to the youth. And then he moved me up to, then I would teach classes to the adults on Wednesday night. And then after that, then I began to go out and preach. And I went to Shelby Money would let me stand and preach at East Pineville all the time. And then I would preach at Mill Creek. And then eventually the Lord called me to be a pastor at Hosman. And then after from Hosman, he called me to be the pastor at Mill Creek. And every time though, every step, I was growing and I was getting more people. Getting a bigger, or not necessarily a bigger audience, but getting an older audience. More people to understand. But it wasn't about them; it was about me. I was growing. I was becoming more knowledgeable. I couldn't stand and pastor a church at a young age. God had to show me, and there was things that at the two churches that I have pastored. The first church was a great church. Was a lot of elderly people who I loved to death, and they nurtured me as a young pastor. They let me make mistakes, and they helped me through. They were so good to me. Wayne Walters was a great deacon for me as a young pastor. He showed me and he taught me so much. And then as I got to Mill Creek, that stuff prepared me for what I had to face at Mill Creek. And what we don't realize so many times is we think, oh, I'm not doing as much as so-and-so's doing, or I'm not as important in the church as so-and-so is. But what we don't realize is we are just as important. Every little piece is so important. And to us, it may seem like we're not doing as much, but to God, we are. But what we've got to understand is before I can teach Sunday school, here's something that I think we fail with churches. Before I can teach Sunday school, I need to be in Sunday school. Before I can be the Sunday school teacher, I need to come to Sunday school and listen and learn myself. Before I can, be a preacher, I've got to study my Bible. I've got to get some things. I've got to understand some things. But and that's just something that I've seen there. But we're going to go on in verse 3. And it says, and David told him, and at the end of verse 2, he said, I will surely go forth with you myself also. And here David, we're going to see here a type of Christ that David is. And all through the life of David, we see how he is a type of Christ, and he points to Christ, but he can never fulfill fully like Christ did. But the people answered and said, Thou shalt not go forth, for if we flee away, they will not care for us. Neither if half of us die, will they care for us. But now thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore now it is better that thou secure us out of the city. And the king said unto them, What seemeth you best, I will do. So David wanted to go to battle with them. All right. But the people looked and said, no, you need to stay here and let us protect you. You need to stay here and let us help you. And when I see this, here's what I see. I see a church in this. And in a lot of, in a lot, we have to realize in churches, people are called to do things. And I feel like that as a pastor, but just as a having a burden for the church, I feel like our members of our churches, and I'm talking about our church, Mill Creek Baptist Church, and other churches around. I feel like people don't do what they're supposed to do. And you say, how is that, preacher? Well, one person should only have one to maybe two jobs in a church. If you've got a big, if you've got a congregation of 100 people, you ought to be able to, people ought to be working and doing things. And for like our church, we ought to have, we run 3 church vans on Wednesday nights. And every Wednesday night, the same 3 people drive. And we've got we've got some that's been driving for multiple years. And a church the size of our church shouldn't be doing that. We should be able to have a rotation to where these 3 people drive one night and those 3 people drive the next night. And it goes on that with the cooking that takes place in our church and with things that's taking place. But see here, these people, they stood, and I'm not saying that that a pastor shouldn't, I do think a lot of times too is, and I'm probably, a lot of people ain't going to, a lot of pastors probably going to befriend me after this statement, but that's okay. That our pastors, they're sometimes we think that all we're supposed to do is stand up and preach. No, we're supposed to be there, and we're supposed to be a shepherd. If you look for the sheep, you're going to find the shepherd, aren't you? Wherever the sheep are, that's where the shepherd's going to be. And and us pastors, we have to work. And we have to be there all the time. And we have to be there every time that we can be. And we have to do things when nobody else can do things. We have to be the example. And so many of us, so many pastors today, they want to tell everybody what to do, but don't want to show people what to do. But we see here David stayed back. The people wanted him to stay back because they wanted to fulfill their part. They wanted to do what God had called them to do. And I feel like in our churches today, we have that's not a stronghold where people are wanting to do what God has called them to do. And some people, it may be just cleaning up the church. Some people, it may be cutting the grass at the church. Some people, it may be fixing the flowers at the church. Some, it may be changing the letters on the sign at the church. And we need to have people, running the sound systems at the church. Some, it may just be taking up offering at the church. Some, it may be somebody who stands in the back and says hello and with a smile and tells them that they love them to everybody that comes in the door. But so many times we expect everybody else to do it when we ourselves aren't doing anything. And we say, oh, yeah, we are, Jeremy. I'm so busy. I do this and I do that. And the good thing is, I'm glad God don't get busy. I'm glad he's not too busy for us. But we seem to get too busy for him so often. But let's go on. And here's what I want you to see. Here's where I see the type of Christ. And the king said unto them, what seemeth you best, I will do. And the king stood by the gate side, and all the people came out by hundreds and by thousands. And here's what I want you to understand. As they're going out of the city, the king's standing there, and he's greeting them, and he's telling them, I'm praying for you probably, and good luck, and we're going to be all right. But what I want to see here is he stood at the gate. David didn't go back and get into and go back and lay down in his bed. And David didn't. He learned his lesson with that as he committed his disobedience when he was supposed to be at war at Raha, but he wasn't. He learned his mistakes. He stood at the gate and watched. And I truly believe that we see here a picture of Christ. I truly believe that Jesus, I know this with my kids. There's some times that I have to just, I want to go and tell my boy or my little girl, you need to do it this way. You need to do it that way. But there's sometimes I have to stand back and let them make the mistake and then step in and help them with it. And I believe that that's what Jesus does with us so much. I believe he sits, there's times in our lives that he's standing at the gate like David was, and he's watching, he's overseeing. Or in Jesus' case, he's sitting at the right hand of the Father, and he's watching, and he's overseeing. And he's waiting to see how are we going to handle it. He's waiting to see how are we going to react. He's waiting to see if we can actually do it or if he's going to have to step in. And I feel like that happens a lot with us. I had no doubt in my mind David stood at the gate because in his mind it was what? If the battle gets bad, I'm going to go fight. If the battle gets too hard, I'm going to run down in the midst of them. And that's what I feel like. That's what I believe Jesus does. He lets us go through these battles, but he's watching. And because he can see the warfare that's going around that we can't see. He can see the angels and the demons that are battling around us. And he can see what's around the curve or what's over the hill. And he sees and he knows what we can handle. But he also knows that sometimes the best way for us to learn is to actually make the mistake. Or sometimes the best way for us to learn and the way to get stronger is to actually do it ourselves. I've learned that with my son fishing. There's so many times that I want to just get the fishing pole and cast for him. And I want to, because he's dropping it behind his head, or he's in a tree, or he's hooking me. But what I've learned too, though, if I'm always casting for him, he's never going to learn to cast himself, is he? And so I have to sit back and I have to let him make the mistake and make the mistake. And what he normally does, we went fishing yesterday. He'll fail, he'll cast and he'll fail. And then he'll cast and he'll fail again. And then a third time, he'll get it right. And he done that so many times yesterday. And it helped me remind me of this. You know, we just because it don't seem like just because it seems like God's not there, doesn't mean he's not watching. Even the disciples, when when Jesus had told them to depart and he went up on the mount to pray, and it said he saw them toiling and rowing. They were rowing, but they were going nowhere because the storm and the waves were contrary to them. Because they were, he's seen it, and he went. It wasn't that he didn't. It's not that he doesn't see us. He sees us. But sometimes he wants to see if we can get through it ourselves. He wants to see how strong we are and show us how strong we are. But let's go on. And the king, in verse 5, and the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. And you see here the love he still has for his son. His son has chased him out of the kingdom. His son has chased him out of his own house, has tried to overthrow him, has lied against him, has defiled him, has done everything against him. And what does David say? Deal gently with him. David did not want Absalom to die. David wanted him to be caught captive, and David wanted to bring him back home. And when I seen that, man, you see once again another type of Christ. And I, as I was reading this, I thought about Travis Wilder, what he said one time when we come back from Go Tell camp. He said he was going through the gorges on a motorcycle, and he realized about midway through the gorges that the Lord cannot help stupidity. And I truly believe the Lord can't help it if we climb up on top of the roof and jump off and kill ourselves. There ain't nothing he can do about it. I mean, that's our choice. We made it. The Lord can't help it if we play Russian roulette with a revolver. He can't help that. That's our choice, and he allows us to make. But it is not his will that we would do it. It's not his will. And understand that. It's not God's will that any would perish, but that all would come to repentance. He does not want anybody to go to hell. God's will and God's greatest wish, if you could say, would be that every man and every woman ever born in this world made it to heaven. And see, the problem is in our society today, everybody thinks you can. Everybody thinks it's going to be all right, but that's not the way it is. If you don't have Jesus Christ in your life, if you have not had the blood of him applied to your soul, you will not enter heaven. If you are not a born-again Christian, you will not enter heaven. But we'll go on. But I see here, this is the way Jesus looks at us. Deal gently with him. I know, Dad, I can see him here. I can see him just saying, deal gently with him. Be easy on him. Why? I love him. I care about him. But Jeremy has done you wrong, Jesus. Jeremy has turned his back on you so many times, Jesus. Jeremy has not listened to what you said, Jesus. He's not done what you've asked, Jesus. I know, but deal gently with him because I love him. That's the mercy and the grace we see there in David's life. The same mercy that David showed to Absalom is the same mercy that God shows to us and that Jesus shows to us. Why? because he loves us. But let's go on. We're going to read on down. So the people went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was in the wood of Ephraim, where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David. And there was there a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. And when I read that, I seen our society today. What was Absalom? Absalom was a false prophet. Absalom was a false king. Absalom was a false preacher. Absalom was a false pastor, however you want to put it. But Absalom, the people of it, the people of Israel, that they chose to follow Absalom, and what did it get them? It cost them their life. And that's what's going on in our world today. We have so many people that stand and preach, and pastors that stand and preach, and they're not God called. They're not biblical doctrine preachers. They're feel good prosperity preachers. And I'm not naming any names. I don't really know in my area. I don't know anybody like that. I've never met any, but I know they're out there. Why? Because that's what the Bible says. But what we don't understand is what? When you follow people like that, when you follow people who tell you what you want to hear because it's good to you, when you follow people, that's what Absalom was. Remember, he stole the hearts of the children of Israel because they would come to the king to judge a matter, and he would tell them, "Oh yeah, it's all right, go on, it's fine, you're right in what you say, you're okay." And it's like the world today. It's all right it's all right for homosexuality, and it's all right for abortion, and it's all right to party, and it's all right to get drunk, and it's all right to smoke marijuana. It's all right to do all kinds. It's all right to cheat on your wife or cheat on your husband. It's all right to beat your kids, and it's all right to not honor thy father and thy mother. It's all right to steal, and it's all right to do all this. And people believe that. And what it's doing just like this. There's a battle coming. There's a war that's being waged. And what they don't realize is they're going to walk into the war and they're going to be slain, just like the children of Israel. 20,000 were killed that day. 20,000. Do you think it hurt David? Why? That was David's people. He was their king. He was never dethroned. God had not moved him off. His heart had not changed for who they were. It killed him. It hurt him. It broke him to watch his people be slain. Because why? Because they were following the wrong person. And that's what's happening in the world today. So many are following the wrong one. They're not following Jesus Christ. They're not following the Bible. They're not following the one and only God that there is. They're following gods that have been made by man. And they're following idols. And they're following theologies. And they're following ideals. And they're following cultures. And they're following traditions. But they're not following Jesus, the living thing. And it's going to cause them to lose their life. And here's what I want you to see. And this is what was so remarkable about this. In verse 8, it says, "For the battle was there scattered over the face of all the country." And listen to this. "And the wood devoured more people that day than the sword devoured." What's that saying? It's saying more people died because of what was in the woods that day than they did by the sword. So it wasn't David's men that killed them. It wasn't David's swords. It wasn't his spears that killed the children of Israel. It was their own desires. It was their own wants that killed them. They fell into the traps of this world. And we see this. God loves us. God cares for us. But he can only let us go so far. He can only let us get so far out of the way. Just like the children of Israel when they come out of the wilderness and they murmured and they complained till eventually God said, "What? None of you that are 20 years and older, except for Caleb and Joshua, will come out of the wilderness." And they all and everybody 20 years and older died. That died because why? He had been as patient as he could be, but he seen that they would what? They would be a hindrance to the word of God. They would be a hindrance to the work. And that's what we don't understand. If we're not with God, if we're not for God, we are against God. And we are a hindrance to God. And He's only going to let us be a hindrance long enough. It's like having a splinter in your finger. You can see that splinter, and it's all right off the bat, right? But the longer that splinter stays in there, what? The more it hurts, and it seems like the deeper it gets, the more it festers up, and the more pain it causes. So what do we have to do? We have to get the splinter out. And if we're not careful on what we're doing in our lives, if we're not careful on how we're living, God loves us. God is more gracious and more merciful than we could ever understand. But if He'll only let us go so far, and He'll say, that's enough. Then let in 1 Corinthians 5:5, deliver such a one unto Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that the soul may be saved. Because understand this, the death to God for a Christian is not death. It's a homecoming. And I feel like so many of us are in this shape today. We're following the wrong person. We think we've got church figured out. We think we've got God figured out, but we don't open our Bibles. We don't pray. We don't keep the commandments. We don't live the way we're supposed to live. For Jeremy, you think you're perfect? No, I'm by no means perfect. But I do know one thing. Every morning, every night, I have to ask my God for forgiveness, because I know I failed Him. I know I've done wrong. And I know, and here's the deal, and I know there's things that I'm going to have to pay for that I've done. And I realize that. And David realized that. But these people didn't realize it, did they? They didn't realize that because they followed the wrong one, it was going to cost their life. And in verse 9, we see the last thing we want to see. And Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. If you remember in chapter 14, it talked about Absalom, how beautiful his hair was, and how great his hair was. And here we see Absalom caught in a tree. He thought he was doing what right. But no doubt in my mind, God had planted that tree there. God had caused that tree's limbs to come down the way they were supposed to. And as Absalom was fleeing, God put that mule right where that mule was supposed to be. And it caught Absalom. Now understand here, Absalom did not die from being in the tree. You read on, Joab comes and kills him. Even against David's word, Joab still kills him. Still takes him out. But Absalom, you say, how can that happen to Absalom? The Bible says you'll reap what you sow. Absalom had sowed sin. So he reaped captivity. He reaped death. We thank everybody for listening today. But we'll try to be back again next Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. And be praying for each other. Mill Creek Baptist Church, always be praying for each other. Be praying for us. And we're always praying for you all. And we love you. And we'll see you either Sunday morning or next Wednesday night.